After a feeling of dissatisfaction with Halo Infinite and a burning itch to still get a Halo experience, I decided I wanted to boot up the previous Halo titles, play through them again, and see how they've stood up after all this time. Halo has played a big part in my gaming experience, and the franchise ranks as one of my all-time favorites. It does so many things right for me, and while the first game isn't without its flaws, it still hits the mark in so many ways. It's no wonder that it became the cultural icon it is now, and it was able to cement the Xbox as a true competitor to the likes of Nintendo and Sony. By the way, this video is going to contain a large amount of spoilers for the game, of course, just a heads up if you haven't already played it and were planning on. The opening cutscene shows a gargantuan spaceship dubbed the Pillar of Autumn, as we hear some exposition on what's going on and where we are. In summary, it seems our ship is under attack by the Covenant, a group of aliens that want to kill us for reasons that aren't really important at the moment. Now, I'll say right off the bat, the game definitely looks very dated in its original graphics. To me, it's very charming and works extremely well for the general tone they want the game to have, but I can also understand it looking off-putting to someone that doesn't have the same nostalgia for the game that I do. There is the Anniversary Edition, of course, that updates the graphics and models, however I'll touch on that later on in the video as I want to focus on how the game was on release. The game isn't shy to throw you into the midst of things as soon as you're introduced to the titular man himself, who's just been woken up from a hefty cryo sleep, and start making your way through the ship. Explosions start to rock throughout as the Covenant start to board and invade. And this is where we are briefly introduced to two of our main antagonists from the Covenant, the Grunts and the Elites. The designs and personalities of each alien very clearly show why they've been named as such. The Grunts are small, stocky little aliens with gas masks covering their face and big arms that perfectly exaggerate their cowardly nature as they start flailing them around, screaming the moment you start to fight back. It's very clear that they don't really want to be there fighting you. There's something really nostalgic for me about killing Grunts and hearing the wild scream that they do. The personality they've been given and the comical ragdolls of the game just feel so Halo to me in a way no other game in the franchise does. The Grunts have been designed to be fun to kill. They're cannon fodder, and the game doesn't shy from poking fun at that. The Elites are tall, sleek aliens with bright, shining armor and an imposing athletic build. They take way more to kill, and unlike the Grunts they're leading, they'll duck and weave your gunfire in an attempt to avoid damage and kill you. The design itself carries an air of superiority that's fitting for the name given to them, and their deeper, gravelly voice makes them much more imposing than the funny nature of the Grunts. In saying all that, of course, the game doesn't shy away from poking a bit of fun at them either, as they'll still fly around when you kill them and let out super exaggerated yells when they die. The thing I like most about these designs is that they look properly alien and are able to convey their roles with ease. Not only that, but the silhouettes are so distinct and easy to differentiate from each other that there won't ever be any confusion as to what you're looking at. During this first mission, you're introduced to two alien weapons, the plasma pistol and the plasma rifle. Because both are held in a similar way to the pistol and the assault rifle you're given, you can generally guess their usage. However, the designs themselves look nothing like a human would ever actually use, which is the point, of course. They aren't made to be used by humans. But it's just something I've always liked about the Halo franchise. These are aliens we're fighting and dealing with. It doesn't make much sense that their technology would look like our own. I've gotten a bit ahead of myself here, so let's take a step back and keep progressing through the mission. We get led through the halls by a Marine where we finally reach the bridge of the ship, where we get properly introduced to the two characters we saw in the opening cutscene, Captain Keyes and the onboard ship AI Cortana. Keyes informs us and Cortana that we have to leave as the Covenant invasion is too strong to fight back, and the protection of Cortana and the knowledge she contains is priority one. So she gets uploaded to a futuristic SD card and the Chief plugs her into his head to start evacuating. The core of this mission is just making your way through the ship's sprawling hallways, fighting off the Covenant forces as they appear. There's multiple different routes you can take. You can be as aggressive as you want and mow your way through all the enemy forces, or try and sneak behind them using the small hallways presented throughout the ship. It's also during this mission that you're introduced to the core Covenant aesthetic. Smooth, rounded, shiny purple pods dropping off the Covenant invaders are present throughout the Pillar of Autumn's hallways. It's not super important at the moment, but will play a part in the next mission, so I thought I had to point it out. Eventually, you end up finding the final escape pod and evacuate the now decimated ship. Both you and it are now heading straight for the giant ring world ahead of you as you brace for a crash landing. The second mission starts with you crashing into the ring. All other Marines who boarded the escape pod with you have died, leaving the Chief as the lone survivor. As soon as you step out of the pod, you're greeted with a wonderful shot of the surface of the ring, with a huge halo stretching off into the distance. It's a super iconic shot and does a great job of giving you a sense of scale. You don't get much time to appreciate the scenery, however, as the Covenant are hot on your tail, looking for any survivors to quickly wipe out. You make your way through the mountains, finding the Covenant forces waiting there for you, as you stumble upon a strange grey structure that a group of surviving crew members have taken cover at. It's not Covenant, and it's not human. It's a new third faction that seems to have long since left the ring. This mission sets a great atmosphere which is ever present throughout the whole game's campaign, as we'll come to see. The ring looks like a wonderful place, full of lush greenery and flowing rivers, however it seems to be strangely empty for how expansive it is. The only signs of life is you and the invading Covenant. The main focus of this mission is driving around the landscape of the ring, locating and defending surviving crew from attacking Covenant until a rescue ship can arrive and take them to safety. After doing this the first time, you head into a cave that Cortana expertly deduces as not being a natural formation, and it's here we're more properly introduced to the aesthetic of the third faction. Tall, expansive grey walls of glowing lights lining them, it's all very dark and empty. If it weren't for the Covenant stationed in there, it would feel sterile almost, the air still. Even though they feature futuristic tech like energy bridges and random giant beam shooter things, it still has an almost ancient feel to it. They look like giant stone structures made a very long time ago. It's also in this mission that we're introduced to the third member of the Covenant forces, the Jackals. They serve to buff out the variety of infantry that the Covenant has. While they are about as easy to kill as a grunt, the big shields they carry make them much more difficult to actually hit. You have to try and aim for the only visible section of their body in order to start properly damaging them, their hand. They're also not as cowardly as the grunts. They will run away from you if you get close, but that's more so that they can keep a good distance in order to make them harder to hit. They add a degree of difficulty that grunts and elites can't feel themselves. By mixing these three enemies together, it forces the player to be more strategic, making you actually think about your positioning around the open fields of the ring and not letting you just run in and gun everything down. I'd also like to take this time to properly address the soundtrack. If there's anything the Halo franchise is known for, it's the killer OST produced for it. Martin O'Donnell has done a spectacular job, with each song that plays being memorable and recognizable in its own right. The main theme itself being woven into multiple different tracks, tying them all together. The music is used sparingly, only in the right moments to invoke certain feelings, whether that's to complement the carnage you're creating as you tear through your enemies, or giving you a sense of foreboding as you traverse the ring. The music cues being so carefully chosen is what makes the whole OST stand out the way it does. Each time a new track is introduced, it's given enough breathing room to solidify itself to the player. You'll never get tired of them as well, as you'll only hear the soundtrack when it matters. They never get overplayed or feel repetitive. There's intent expertly crafted into each track, elevating the experience the game wants you to have. You can tell how much skill and ability was poured into it, and it's no wonder it stood the test of time and become a staple of the franchise. Anyway, back to the mission. As we make our way across the mountain ranges of the ring, which, by the way, the game does a really good job of making it feel like you're in an open world, even though you're not. It's open enough and doesn't give you any straightforward directions on where to go. You just sort of start driving and the map design leads you to the right location. There's no reliance on invisible walls or weird out of bounds areas. Any space you're not meant to go is hidden off in a way that feels natural. And because of the nature of the mission, you aren't in one location for long enough for it to feel restricting or for you to really want to try and explore outside of where you need to go. Eventually, you save the last group of survivors and Cortana informs you that Captain Keyes, while alive, has been captured by the Covenant. Your new mission now is to infiltrate the Covenant ship and rescue the captain. The mission starts with you and a few Marines landing in a rocky mountainside at the dead of night. The Covenant ship that is holding Captain Keyes hostage, dubbed the Truth and Reconciliation, is using the location as a means of distributing supplies to its troops. This is a stealth mission. Your goal is to pick off the Covenant stationed around the ship before you make your way into its gravity lift and start infiltrating. You're given a sniper rifle to replace the usual Magnum with the goal of catching each enemy by surprise and quickly picking them off before they can can react to you. This accumulates with you finally reaching the gravity lift of the Covenant ship, where you now have to pick off the forces the Covenant sends down at you while you wait for some more reinforcements to help aid your rescue mission. It's here we're introduced to the last of the Covenant's army in this game, the Hunters, which are my favorite designs Halo has to offer. Hunters are huge, hulking aliens covered head to toe in gleaming blue armor, wielding a huge plasma cannon in one arm and a giant silver shield in the other. They serve as the boss forces of the Covenant, always being deployed in a pair. The Hunters take no damage head on and can only be killed by attacking specific locations, the gaps in their armor. Either on their back or on their neck, hitting anywhere else proves ineffective. If you stay too far away and try and pick them off, they'll guard themselves with their large shields and bombard you with plasma, forcing you to get up close in order to properly engage and kill them. Once you do get close, they'll forego their plasma cannon and opt to instead use their shield like a club and attempt to smack you into non-existence with it. Luckily, due to their size, they're relatively slow, so just baiting and avoiding their smack, then bombarding their exposed backs is the easiest way of disposing of them. Once you get the knack of how to beat them, they definitely lose the sense of danger they are meant to invoke. Doesn't help that they'll get one shot with the Magnum if you do hit their weak spot. However, they do the job of being a boss enemy well enough, and to a new player who hasn't had the experience of fighting them before, they can be quite threatening and hard to deal with. I've always loved how the Hunters looked. Even though they're so big, the design is so sleek and imposing. After disposing of the two Hunters, you and your squad of Marines use the gravity lift to board the ship. This mission makes a great juxtaposition to the first, where the Covenant were invading your ship, you're now invading theirs. It's also here we get a really good look at the aesthetic of the Covenant. Rounded, purple, blue and pink walls covered in glowing lights, strange, angled hallways of doors featuring an unknown language that segment open. I love the design of the Covenant. It looks different enough to feel alien without being too out there. When you board the ship, it at first seems like it's empty. There's no enemies waiting for you. Instead, the Covenant try and ambush you with invisible elites wielding wicked blades. You have to be careful with these guys. If you let them, they'll decimate your Marine squad, making the mission all the more harder. Luckily, they're a lot easier to kill off, as they don't have the energy shields normal elites have due to the active camo they're using. After dispatching them, the Covenant starts flooding you with waves of enemies, topping it off with another pair of Hunters. You spend the mission traversing the Covenant ship, making your way through its sprawling hallways until you reach a docking station, where you're able to get some more reinforcements and continue the rescue mission. Finally, after making your way through more hallways, you eventually come across the holding cell where Captain Keyes is captive. After dispatching the elites and grunts guarding him and releasing him from his cell, you learn a bit more about the ring. It's revealed the ring is called Halo by the Covenant in some not so subtle title-dropping dialogue, and it appears to be religious to them in some way, referred to as a weapon by them that can control the universe. Obviously, this doesn't bode well for humanity, so the objective changes to stop the Covenant from getting control of the ring. It appears that there's some kind of control station the Covenant is searching for on the ring, so your next goal is to find it before they do. Before you're able to do that, you have to escape the Covenant ship with the captain. Him and the Marines he had with him will follow you around in this part of the mission. You have to lead them back to the docking station you found earlier so that the captain can hijack one of the Covenant's dropships to escape. The hardest part of this section being that the captain can't die. If he does, you have to restart from your last checkpoint. Really, it's not that difficult at all. Just stay in front of him and kill off the Covenant as quickly as possible, and you should be fine. After making your way back to the dock and taking control over a dropship, the captain flies off, quickly killing off a couple hunters by ramming into them. We begin the next mission heading towards a small island, littered with the Covenant as they believe it's the location of what they call the Silent Cartographer. The Cartographer being a map room that will have the location of the Halo's control center. Your guns are blazing from the start here. Right as you land, you have to wipe out some Covenant forces in order to proceed. This mission is one of the coolest because there isn't a single section of the island you can't explore. You can even skip an entire section just by going backwards instead of straight ahead. For the sake of this playthrough, I won't be doing that obviously, but it's still cool that you even have that option. As we make our way around the island, we come across our first outpost that the Covenant have situated at. After swiftly dispatching the surrounding forces, you quickly try and make your way deeper into the ancient complex, only to be locked out as the Covenant have taken control of the ring security system. You'll have to head back out and disable it before you can proceed. It's located at another outpost on the island. We make our way around the circumference of the island, cutting through the middle and engaging with another pair of hunters before we come across the second outpost where the security system is located. It's fairly easy to disable, there's just a handful of Covenant guarding the area and yet another set of hunters inside. After quickly dispatching the Covenant's somewhat pitiful attempt at stopping you and disabling the installation's security system, you make your way back outside, fight off some invisible elites the Covenant have sent to stop your progress, and make your way back to the first outpost, which again, due to the nature of the map's design, is pretty easy to get to. This second outpost leading right to the starting section of the mission, quickly looping you around and back to where you need to be without the need of you backtracking at all. It's here, once we return back to the first outpost and make our way deeper into the ancient labyrinth located on the ring, that we get to see some of my favourite layouts for the ring's constructs. We've had some glimpses on what the architecture of the beings that resided on the ring looked like from earlier missions, but it's here we get a deeper look into what defined them, broadening our understanding of their culture just on design cues alone. As we make our way deeper towards the silent Cartographer, you'll see multiple strange rune-like carvings in the walls, futuristic symbols that have been crafted into them with a significance lost to us. As opposed to the dimly lit grey we've been seeing so far, we're instead exposed to gleaming golden walls adorning each corridor. Mixed in with the bright blue holographic paneling really makes for a standout visual, especially juxtaposed with the Covenant's haphazardly placed blockades. This location is also huge, displayed by a short cutscene where Chief knocks some kind of rock down a deep pit. We're only scratching the surface of this installation, and we're only left to wonder what else is located in its depths. As we make our way through the level, killing off any of the Covenant forces trying to stop us find the Cartographer, we get news that we have to act fast. The outside forces are starting to struggle holding back the Covenant. With the pressure on, we make our way deeper into the complex, eventually stumbling upon the impressive map room. After activating the Cartographer, Cortana is quickly able to find the ring's control center. She attempts to contact Keyes and inform him of the discovery, but strangely Keyes seems to be out of reach, possibly due to some form of technical issue with his equipment. Definitely nothing to worry about, I'm sure. With the knowledge of the ring's control center now in our hands, we work our way back up to the top and board a pelican that's been waiting for us, who, on the instruction of Cortana, lowers us into the middle portion of the island, taking us even further down into the ring. I mentioned previously that the game does a great job of giving you a faux open world feeling, and this mission in particular stands out at doing that the best. Because you're limited to an island, it really feels like you can go anywhere, and finding your way through the mission is entirely up to your own deduction skills. It also goes to show just how well designed the levels are, because even though you are free to go anywhere and approach the mission however you would like, the map has been laid out to subconsciously push you to take the correct path. It makes you feel like you're the one making the choice on where to go, when in actuality the game is subtly directing you. The space we've entered is huge and sprawling. It appears we've gotten deep into the ring. The Pelican isn't able to take us any further, however, so we have to make our way to the control center on our own from here. After landing, you're assaulted by Covenant right from the get-go. The whole place is crawling with them. Now, I hope you like the look of this room because you'll be seeing it a lot during this mission, and it's definitely here that the cracks in the game's level design do start to show themselves. We'll talk more about that later though, because after clearing this area, we're outside again on a bridge far above the ground. The outdoor sections of this mission are its highlight by a long shot. Even with its dated graphics, I still find it looking quite stunning. The greys and glowing blues of the ring's constructs contrast well with the white snow, and the subtle snowfall and light fog bring it all together very nicely. This is short-lived for now though, as after we cross the bridge that's covered in Covenant, we're inside another one of these circle rooms. That's what I'm going to call them now. I will admit this one is slightly different. In fact, every time the room is reused, it is slightly different to the last time, so it isn't all bad. After clearing the room, we take a cool elevator deeper down the installation, clearing out another circle room and popping outside. This area, and again, all these areas are the highlight of the mission. It feels huge. You're traversing a snow-covered ravine filled with Covenant shooting at you and the struggling Marines who landed there to support you from every angle. There's banshees and ghosts flying by and a wraith in the distance taking pot shots at you. And if you look up, you can even see the very bridge you were walking across just moments ago. Really helps make everything feel connected. Very well executed, if you ask me. As we progress further, it's here you get to really have some fun. There's a nice Scorpion tank waiting idly for you, and a bunch of Covenant to work as target practice. The tank itself feels pretty fluid to control. Go figure, of course, as that's been a constant throughout the game. The only issue is the reticle can make it a bit unclear on if your shot is going to hit where you're aiming. At least that's what I've found. There was countless occasions where I lined up a shot from the tank that seemed to miss even though the reticle made it appear as if it was a hit. This is a minor thing though, and honestly, it could all just come down to my own incompetence. The tank is still super fun to play, the best part of the mission I'd say. After mercilessly blowing up your foes, you progress further and further through the snowy terrain. While there's a lot of enemies, even their own tanks can't stand up to your firepower. Driving the tank into the depths of the ring, you come across a vast open cave. Sorry if I'm retreading ground here, but the game does a really good job of showing you scale when it comes to these large open areas. It really looks like there's no boundaries at all. Eventually, and sadly, we get to a point where we have to leave the tank behind and continue on foot. The game does soften the blow by giving us a few marines to make up for it, or it would if I didn't accidentally blow them up. After making our way through another quick snowy area, the fun continues as we have to clear another circle room. Now this one isn't too bad. The whole area is filled with sleeping grunts, and if you want to, you can just run up and smack all of them in their sleep instead of starting a firefight. It's fun to do at least. After clearing that room, you take a lift to yet another circle room and finally are outside again on another bridge. It's not too hard to make your way across, the most difficult part of it being a second parallel bridge that also has enemies on it who will pepper you with shots. Crossing the bridge, we are brought to another circle room, a small hallway, a circle room again, finally leading around to the other bridge that was parallel with the one we just crossed. This bridge leading to, guess what? 2 more circle rooms, finally leading outside to a ledge littered with a few Covenant and a Banshee, the giant control center finally being revealed. Quickly hijacking the Banshee, we're able to make our way in, killing off the horde of Covenant stationed there, and insert Cortana, giving her access to the full knowledge of the ring. She's being extremely vague in this section, the huge influx of knowledge catching her off guard as she scans through it. But we're able to get some key bits of information here. 1. The ring was built by Forerunners. 2. It seems the Covenant have stuffed up majorly, as they found something horrible buried in the ring, and now they're afraid. And 3. We have to save Captain Keyes. The weapons catch he was looking for seems to be something much more disastrous. She doesn't give us any time to catch up, just tells us we have to find Keyes and stop him, before it's too late. Now, I can understand why there was so many reused assets in this mission. Game developers only have a finite amount of time to make the game shippable, and sometimes it's required to repeat assets in order to meet the deadline. And it's not the first time in the game that they reuse the same general location multiple times in a mission. In fact, pretty much all of the missions up to this point have followed this formula. The biggest issue of this mission in particular is that these circle rooms are used way too many times, more times than any other location in prior missions. I counted 9 times this room was used. While there was slight variation between each room, both with the layout and the enemies mixed in, it still doesn't stop them from feeling monotonous and boring to traverse after the 3rd time. If they really wanted to pad out this mission, I honestly think that they should have just extended the tank section, as that was the most fun. I'm sure they could have cut out a few of those rooms and just made that section a tad longer, or just completely remove half of the rooms entirely and changed nothing else. The mission itself feels like it drags on because of the reuse assets. Whether or not it actually is longer, it felt like it was. There was a point when I got to the end of the mission that I was glad it was finally over and I didn't have to deal with this area anymore. I would have much preferred a shorter mission, even shorter than the other ones, if it meant less of repeating the same room. The mission itself is still really great, the snowy landscape is really nice, and every time you're able to explore it, the mission becomes super fun. I just wish there was more of that and less of the indoor sections. We open up, landing in a dark, rainy, swamp-like location covered in a deep, thick fog, only allowing us to see so far ahead. The Covenant is briefly shown as well, but they seem to already be fleeing from something. The area is very quiet. There's destroyed Pelicans and Covenant ships alike littering the swamp. And even though the Covenant forces are present, they aren't nearly as overwhelming as they have been, and seem to only be made up of grunts and jackals. There's no elites in sight. Something big has happened here. What that is, we're yet to find out. Pushing all this strangeness aside, the mission is simple. Find Keyes and get him out of there. As we make our way through the gloomy swamp, we eventually come upon a Forerunner structure. Again, we see a group of Covenant desperately fleeing from the location, not even bothering to react to you. Taking the elevator down, we make our way deeper into the structure. There's a small collection of Covenant waiting for us inside. However, it's again not nearly close to what we've come to expect. The way they're huddled together as well, it almost seems as if they're hiding from something. The deeper we go, the stranger things become. we enter a huge open room that has a green substance dripping down in the middle, and just beyond that is a small hallway filled with dead Covenant forces, the walls caked in blood. Further and further we go, each room empty and quiet. There's only the leftovers of the Covenant's weaponry scattered throughout, but none of the Covenant themselves are present. We come across the first Marine that we've seen in this mission, but he screams at us, yelling that he doesn't want to become one of those things, and starts blindly shooting us. The rooms we enter have been devastated. Blood splatters and bullet marks litter the walls, with ramps and pathways broken down and on fire. Eventually, the chief comes across a dead body of a Marine laying against a door, and the reality of the situation at hand is finally shown to us. Viewing the recordings left in the Marine's helmet, we're able to see exactly what happened. The Marines land in the swamp and make their way into the same construct we have. Inside, they too find deceased Covenant littered around the area. The corpse of an elite found killed by plasma damage. The Marines assume it must have been some kind of friendly fire. Fast forwarding through the footage, we see a Marine hacking his way into the door we've just come into on the request of Keys. When they get inside, things turn for the absolute worst. Small alien creatures flood the area, dozens of them attacking the Marines and Keys. The footage cuts out before we're able to see what happens, but the bloodshed around us doesn't spell out a happy ending. And now, with the knowledge of a new threat that has caused all this destruction, do we finally get our first hands-on encounter. Right as the chief stops viewing the footage, the same aliens start bursting out the locked doors. This is the Flood, and the small creatures are flood spores. The spores themselves are very weak, only requiring a single shot to kill, exploding into a cloud of noxious-looking gas and chunks of flesh. However, while they aren't very durable, they make up for it in numbers. Dozens of them swarm you every time they are released into the room. They lunge at you, killing themselves in the process, but doing very minimal damage. If you allow yourself to be overwhelmed, you'll quickly lose all your health. After disposing of a few dozen flood spores, we're finally met with the real threat the Flood brings. Huge, hulking flood creatures leap out at you, easily jumping large distances and smacking you with their huge tendril-like hands. If you look closely, you'll notice they bear a striking resemblance to elites, ones that are heavily deformed at least. The Flood are zombie-like creatures in essence. However, calling them just zombies is definitely doing them a disservice. We'll get into that more though, but with this knowledge we're able to figure out why the only Covenant around on this mission were grunts and jackals. All of the powerful elites have been transformed into these monsters, the Flood infected form. We have to escape. Still unsure as to where the Marines and Keys exactly are, but just looking around, it's not too hard to guess that they probably aren't around anymore. I adore the design of the Flood. Again, far from being simple zombies, they're covered in huge growths that you can only imagine as throbbing and filled with gross pus, the sickly pale color of their skin, elongated limbs, and disgusting dark green blood makes for a visceral picture. The infected forms are nothing like the Covenant we've faced. They are relentlessly aggressive, not caring for how much damage they take. Unlike elites, they won't try and strafe around you and take cover. They'll just throw themselves at you and either smack you with their limbs or gun you down. The only thing that will stop them from attacking you is killing them completely. You can even shoot out chunks of flesh and destroy entire limbs, and the Flood will still come at you. The spores, again, don't do much damage and are easy to kill, but they work excellently in tandem with the infected forms. Due to their sheer numbers, if you don't take them out quickly, they'll chip away at your shield, allowing the aggressive, more durable infected forms to knock you down swiftly. Back to the mission, there's no time to lose. The horde of the Flood is growing bigger and bigger. Once they're revealed, you'll constantly see a mass of red dots on your radar. They are everywhere in this area. Backtracking, you see the Flood are overwhelming the small remaining forces of the Covenant, which works well for you as both forces distract themselves from your fleeing form. We try to take one of the elevators we took before to make our way out of here, but sadly it blows up the moment we try and call it. The Flood are destroying the place from the inside in an attempt to stop anyone from fleeing. You'll notice that the normally pristine Forerunner structures now have a dirty hue to them. The glass is tinted with filth, and the sleek greys we've been seeing have almost been smeared with a layer of grime. The map itself feels dirty, like it too is being infected. We're able to find another elevator, but instead of taking us up and out of the area, it takes us even further down. The elevator shaft is dark and dim. the only thing illuminating it being the smeared Covenant blood lining the walls. This is something that's been present throughout the game, but is utilized wonderfully in this specific mission. The game's use of gore, while somewhat cartoony looking in its excessiveness, does a wonderful job of environmental storytelling. Just by looking at these walls alone, you can tell that huge amounts of Covenant were dragged down this lift well, and that doesn't bode well for you in the slightest. After going through multiple flood-infected rooms, we finally find another elevator that takes us up and towards the exit, where we're able to get back in contact with our ticket out of here. There's a squad of Marines waiting for us just outside, survivors who also lost contact with each other and were ambushed by the flood just like you. Our pilot informs us that there's a large tower ahead. If we make our way there, they'll be able to pick us up and get us out of here. The dense fog of the swamp we're in makes fighting the flood even more disastrous. Because we can only see so far ahead of ourselves, it allows the flood to constantly overwhelm us and appear out of every corner they can. Jumping from atop trees and ledges, there isn't a single area the flood aren't hiding in. When we finally reach the tower, there's still a huge amount of flood everywhere, but now there's something else, and it appears to be helping us. Strange, grey machines firing constant lasers at the flood are aiding in our battle. There's also a glowing blue orb in the sky humming to itself. It introduces itself as the monitor of Installation 04, its name being 343 Guilty Spark. He's come out because someone has released the flood. His function is to prevent them from leaving the ring, but he'll need your help in doing so. Before you even get the chance to reply, he teleports you away, ending the mission. This mission stands out as one of, if not the best mission of the entire game. What a way to introduce the flood. The suspense built as you make your way through the swamp and the structure. I briefly mentioned it before, but Bungie nailed it with the environmental storytelling with this mission. The fleeing Covenant, the destroyed ships outside, there's so many areas to unpack. You can explore each room and get clues and hints as to what happened. The introduction of the flood was nailed as well. I really don't think they could have done this better. One of my favorite parts of this map is actually straight after the blood-covered elevator. You can see just how desperate the Covenant were in trying to stop the flood. The doorways are excessively blocked off, and the controls from the bridge have been blown up in an attempt to stop the flood from crossing. Truly a masterclass of storytelling and level design. They really went all out with this one, and it shows. The mission starts with an establishing shot of the index. Our goal is to collect it before we can activate the installation. The library itself is a bit of a controversial mission. It's the longest feeling, and visually, most repetitive mission in the entire campaign. Unlike Assault on the Control Room, which repetitive nature is broken apart by enjoyable open snow sections, the library features nothing of the sort. The entire mission is spent deep inside the ring, slowly making our way towards the top of this construct, following the monitor and fighting away hordes of flood. I myself actually quite like this mission, not particularly on the level design, but more on the atmosphere it creates. The flood presence is endless. They continue to pour out of every hole in the walls, coming in droves as you progress through the mission. You cannot try and rush this section. The flood will overwhelm you if you aren't paying attention. It's here we're also introduced to another flood form, the flood carriers. Working as a walking bomb, the carriers are slow-moving creatures with stubby legs and huge pulsing bulbous bodies. They'll hobble towards you the moment they see you, laying down and exploding once they're close enough, both causing damage to you and releasing a number of flood spores into the area. They tend to be grouped together when you see them, as when one explodes, the rest gets set off, creating a chain reaction of explosions and launching flood spores everywhere. You want to be careful with them as well, as grenades and the like won't kill them straight up, but will instead launch them in a random direction where they'll only explode when they finally hit the ground. If you aren't calculated with your grenade throws, you could end up launching one right at yourself. The endless stream of spores, infected forms, and carrier forms, mixed with the very limited health you can find, makes this mission feel stressful. The overbearing presence of the flood is amplified by the lack of escape you have. I remember hating this mission as a kid. The flood used to scare me here because they just wouldn't stop. You have no choice but to face them head on, using the very weapons they drop to get more ammo to continue fighting, otherwise you'll die. The mission itself plays out pretty straightforward. You have to follow the monitor around the installation as it makes its way towards the index, killing off the flood that are constantly trying to kill you. There's a few instances where you have to hold your position while the monitor will either deal with another issue that it deems more pressing, or unlocking the door you need to go through to progress further. These sections themselves proving to be the hardest part of the mission, as the flood just doesn't stop. The monitor itself is all but cheery throughout the mission, as if the carnage around it is of no concern. You'll hear it hum to itself, talk about how smart it is, and drop hints of exposition about the flood and what exactly you're doing. The whole mission is very dark, and I can agree that it does get super repetitive. However, I found myself not being nearly as annoyed with it as I was with the reused circle room and assault on the control room, mainly because you don't get a time to really take in the location. The flood is endless and you really have to focus, otherwise they'll quickly kill you. And while I agree that it could have been cut down, I find the sprawling, endless nature of the mission's layout complements how the flood are meant to make you feel. You're alone on this mission. Cortana isn't here with you, and there's no marines that'll come and assist you either. Sometimes the monitor will give you supplementary forces in the Sentinels, however they are very basic and don't have any sort of character associated with them. They are just tools for the monitor to use to contain an outbreak. There's not a whole lot to say about the mission itself story-wise. You continue through the library, taking huge elevators further up as you make your way towards the index, killing off the flood as you go. Once you finally reach the index and remove it, the monitor takes it out of your hand as protocol dictates that he must carry it, due to your organic form making you vulnerable to infection. With the index secured, the monitor teleports you away once more to the control room so that we can activate the installation. This mission could have used being cut down a bit, but I still find myself getting enjoyment out of it just due to how they convey the flood and use the level design to amplify the feelings of fear they can cause you. If anything, the library feels like a case of missed potential. If the dev team had more time and more processing capabilities, I'm sure this mission would have ended up being a fan favorite. Still, to me, it does a commendable job of doing what it was trying to do. The monitor teleports us back into the control room, informing us that we must insert the index in order to activate the installation so that he can wipe out the flood. He would do it himself, however, protocol doesn't allow it, so you must be the one to activate the ring. Before you're able to start the sequence, Cortana appears, stopping the ring from activating properly. It's here she reveals the true nature of what the ring is. The ring doesn't necessarily kill the flood, rather, it kills the flood's food. Activating the ring destroys all life in the galaxy, technically ending the threat of the flood, but bringing everything else with it. The monitor is very annoyed with Cortana's interference, and confirms that she is correct with the ring's purpose. He is confused that you weren't aware of this. After he realizes that Cortana won't give up the index, and you are now against him and are protecting her, he instructs his sentinels to kill you and retrieve the index from Cortana before teleporting away. Everyone is now against us. The Covenant, the Flood, and now the ring's monitor. The only allies we have is ourselves. We have a new mission now, Destroy Halo. Cortana is attempting to locate where the Pillar of Autumn crashed. Our goal is to use its fusion reactors to blow up the ring. While she's attempting that, she informs us that there is some of Halo's primary firing mechanisms located in the canyons around us. Destroying them will mean the monitor will have to perform repairs before the ring is usable, buying us some time in case he's able to find a way to activate the ring without the index. This mission plays out pretty much identically to Assault on the Control Room, except we're going through it backwards. There's also the added threat of both the Flood and the Sentinels mixed in along with the Covenant, making it a bit trickier to navigate. Being a rehash of Assault on the Control Room, there's nothing really too new here. Luckily, while there was a reliance on the circle rooms in that mission, you don't have to go through nearly as many in this one. And they serve a bit more of a purpose, as some of them store the generators we have to destroy. You make your way around the canyons, fighting off Covenant and Flood, hijacking Banshees and using them to fly around to the generators. A lot of the time, you'll go to a location and see either Covenant and Flood engaged in battle, or Sentinels burning down Flood. It's a devastating battle between all factions that you're stuck in the middle of. There's 3 total generators you have to destroy. The way you do so is just ramming into them, your suit's shield acting like an EMP blast apparently. The mission ends once you destroy the final generator. Cortana being able to tap into the same teleporting technology the monitor uses momentarily in order to bring you to the assumed location of Captain Keyes. It's hard for me to talk specifics about this mission as it plays closely to Assault on the Control Room. I do like the night setting, it complements the snowy biome nicely, and flying around in the Banshee allows you to appreciate the map's aesthetics in a new way without the devs having to modify much at all. If it wasn't for all the war going on around you, the place would be quite nice. One of the main annoyances with this mission in particular is the way the Flood were handled. They get a bit too overwhelming, if you ask me. It worked in the library, as that was all you were dealing with. However, mixing them in with the Covenant, and taking into account the game's reluctancy to provide health, made me get a bit frustrated at a few sections. That could all come down to my own lack of skill, of course, but I thought it was worth pointing out. All in all, this is an okay mission. If it weren't for the map burning me out on its design cues initially, I can see myself getting about as much enjoyment as when we first went through this area. Again, there's just a bit too much reliance on the Forerunner structures here. Turning it back a bit in Assault on the Control Room would have helped it feel less samey. Cortana informs us that the Covenant is in a state of chaos. Their leadership has ordered all troops to abandon the ring when they found the Flood, but they were too late. The Flood have overwhelmed the cruiser and have disabled it. The Covenant is fearful that the Flood will repair the ship and use it to escape the ring. So, they've sent a strike team to kill off the Flood, repair the ship themselves, and depart the ring. Keyes is on the cruiser, and somehow he's still alive. Cortana is going to attempt to teleport us as close as she can to him so that we can perform another rescue on the captain and leave the cruiser. We've been dropped into the middle of the ship. The familiar purple halls now in a state of disarray. Panels popped off and on fire, closely mirroring how the Pillar of Autumn looked when it was getting invaded in the first mission. Keyes radios in. Very pained sounding, he tells us to leave him and escape. But we can't abandon the captain, especially if he's as hurt as he sounds, so we press forward. The ship is filled with Covenant and Flood alike battling for supremacy of the cruiser. We make our way through the halls, coming across a hole in the ship's hull caused by a powerful explosion. With the Flood rampaging towards us, we have no choice but to jump out and find another way back into the ship later. This next section is my favourite part of the map. We land in a huge pool of bright coolant that's leaking from the ship, and the entire ground portion is dripping with it. The coolant acts as the main light source as well, making the tight pathways of the ravines all the more menacing to traverse as we engage the Flood and the Covenant. The coolant makes for a lot of pretty visuals. Looking up, you can see the huge ship collapse above you as well, Flood continuously pouring out of it. It's a really iconic and standout segment. We eventually make our way to the ship's gravity lift, taking it back up so that we can continue our rescue mission. Just like in Truth and Reconciliation, we're going into a Covenant ship to save Captain Keyes, however this time, there's no Marines with us. This section plays out in a similar way to that mission, the layout of the ship being the same as the last time we were in it, but instead of being the cause of death and destruction throughout the ship, it's already there. To some people this is frustrating, and I will agree that the Covenant ship missions can feel repetitive. I find, unlike when assets were reused in Assault on the Control Room, I'm not as annoyed with it here. A big part is personal bias and being such a fan of the Covenant aesthetic, but also that this plays a bit more like a callback, seeing as we last boarded the ship towards the start of the game. To me at least, it feels less like repeating a mission I've already played, and more like revisiting a location that's now gotten an entirely different atmosphere to it than it originally did. We make our way through the halls of the Covenant ship. No enemy forces waiting to ambush us this time. Instead, just piles of dead bodies and a few Flood forms here and there. As we progress through the ship, Cortana points out that it seems that the Flood are collecting and gathering bodies of the Covenant. What they're doing it for is yet to be known, but it surely can't be something good. Our destination is the ship's control room, with the hopes of finally finding Keyes before things escalate further. Each corridor and room we enter is destroyed, filled with Covenant and Flood either at war or dead on the ground. A shuttle bay, once brimming of Covenant, is now barren bar a few elites guarding the area. The imposing power the Covenant had has been culled by the Flood's overbearing strength. When we finally reach the control room, the horrors of what has happened to the captain are finally shown to us. His form is barely recognizable, now part of a huge veiny Flood mass that's attached itself to the control room. Whatever part of him that was communicating with us when we boarded is now gone. All that's left is the Flood. I'm a big fan of how grotesque this image is. Captain's face being locked in pain, his and other bodies melting into the throbbing Flood form. I love it. With no other choice, Chief does what Keyes would have wanted, which apparently is ramming his fist into his face and pulling out what was the captain's neural implant. With all that was needed taken, and a solemn goodbye to what was the captain, we head back out to the shuttle bay so that we can find a ride and get off the ship. There's plenty of Flood and Covenant waiting to ambush us on the way out, but it doesn't take much for us to hijack a Banshee and flee the scene, leaving the Covenant to deal with the Flood while we head to the Pillar of Autumn. Reusing the cruiser from the third mission does two things. It allows the developers to expand the scope of their story without taking up much disk space. All the assets needed for the mission are already there, they just have to be tweaked slightly. We see them do this a lot in the later half of the game, but I feel like it's best executed here and in the following mission. It also shows us just how devastating a threat the Flood are. Throughout the first half of the campaign, the Covenant are portrayed as this formidable force that humanity is constantly struggling against. They easily overrun our ship, force us to escape to the ring, and are constantly beating our survivors in combat. Simply boarding the cruiser and rescuing Captain Keyes is an insanely difficult task that we barely accomplish. The idea of taking down the entire cruiser seems ludicrous. The Flood not only causes a mass panic from the Covenant the moment they escape containment, but they also easily overrun the very cruiser we struggled to board. The game doesn't directly state how long it's been between the Flood escaping and the cruiser getting overrun, but based on the context given, I would say it's been at most a week, probably less, and in that time, the Flood have taken over the Covenant's forces on the ring. The Covenant is a formidable force that humanity can only hope to defeat. The Flood are a threat beyond comprehension. Here we are, back where we started, coming into the Pillar of Autumn where we left, through the hole from an escape pod. The ship is a wreck, obviously, with clear signs of damage and grime accumulated from sitting in this open desert where it crashed. It's brimming with Flood, Covenant, and Sentinels, all attempting to stop each other and us. The mission is pretty straightforward. Get to the bridge, upload Cortana, and she'll start a detonation sequence blowing up both the ring and everything stuck on it. We're trekking through all the same hallways we did in the first mission. This time there's no blaring alarm, no Marines to fight beside you and defend the ship. It's just you, your assault rifle, and Cortana. Just like the Keyes mission, I don't get a sense of annoyance having to play through these sections again, even though it's essentially a repeat of the first mission, just in reverse. It's been long enough since we've been in the Pillar of Autumn that seeing it again in such a state makes it feel like a fresh experience. When we make it to the bridge, we're greeted with a familiar but sad sight. The computers and displays, once pristine, are now cracked, dirty, and decayed. The stations, filled with personnel controlling the ship, are now barren and empty. Multiple stations are even on fire. Looking outside, we can see the vast desert the Pillar of Autumn has crashed into, nothing in comparison to the deep depths of space that we saw before. Cortana is loaded back into the ship's interface, reminiscent of when we first grabbed her at the start of the campaign, and she begins a destruction sequence using the captain's implant. Right as she starts the sequence, 343 Guilty Spark reveals himself as being on board as well, having hacked into the ship's systems and taken control of Cortana's data arrays. He's not going to let us blow up the ship and destroy the ring that easily, it seems. It's time to do things manually. Chief has the idea of using a grenade to destroy the ship's engine shields, which Cortana sees as the best solution we have right now. So we begin making our way to engineering, where the engines and Guilty Spark are located. It's really cool going through this mission and catching glimpses of the fights that have been happening as we arrive. Each faction are already locked into battle long before we even got there. There's Sentinels burning down Flood, squads of elites and hunters fighting off Sentinels, and you're stuck in the middle of it all. Really, if you want to, you could hide in the ship's halls and just watch them fight each other, slipping past them quickly to avoid conflict, or waiting for someone to win and finishing off the remainders. And just little things like that, mixed with the dead bodies everywhere, makes the whole fight feel alive and real. It does a good job of making it feel like there's already been a lot going on, and it's not just a bunch of enemies standing around waiting for you to appear. The game purposefully takes you through the same paths you took at the start of the game, even having you cut through the cryo chamber in the same way you did in the intro sequence, finally ending with you making it to the huge multi-level engine room, littered with Flood and Sentinels. Destroying the engine isn't too difficult once you get the knack of it. You have to pull back the exhaust manifolds covering multiple shafts, then use either a grenade or some kind of explosive to blow up the primary fusion drive core housed inside. You do this a total of 4 times. You can't blow up all the engines at once or anything, you have to do it one shot at a time, which I suppose can get a bit repetitive to some, but it wasn't bothersome to me at all, and fighting the Flood and Sentinels between blowing up the engine helped break any sort of monotony I'd feel doing this section. With the engine now going critical, we have 15 minutes to make our hasty escape. Cortana gets in contact with our rescue ship and sets up a collection point. And now we get to one of the coolest and super iconic parts of the game, the Warthog Run. With only 6 minutes left before things go critical, we have to punch it full throttle through the ship's hull and make it to the extraction point. This part of the mission, while hard due to the nature of how somewhat difficult the Warthog is to drive, which is by design I'm fairly certain, is super fun to do. And the visible timer gives the section a great sense of urgency that makes it all the more adrenaline pumping. The game doesn't shy from giving you a number of fleeing targets to run over either, just dropping random Covenant and Flood in front of you for you to squish to your leisure. Now, you could argue that it doesn't really make much sense for a giant spaceship to have huge open hallways going through the middle of it that also just so happen to be racetrack shaped, but to that I say it doesn't really matter because the section is so fun. When we reach the extraction point, the worst happens. Fohammer, our pilot that's been with us since the start of the game and has been lucky to escape the Flood by being airborne, is seen getting shot down by a pair of Banshees. She's been destroyed by the Covenant. Cortana quickly finds another escape route, but we have to act fast. The main theme kicking in, we start our final, desperate drive to escape the exploding ship. There's chunks of the ship exploding in front of us, doorways bursting open, Flood trying to stop us, and the remains of the Covenant not even bothering to get in our way, just also desperately trying to escape. The game does this funny thing where it baits you into thinking you're not really going to make a huge jump, just to catch you at the bottom of your fall into another part of the ship. Just adds a little bit of anxiety to the situation if you weren't on edge already. It's the final stretch. Popping out of the Warthog, we scurry towards the escape ship, narrowly avoiding the Flood and Covenant, and hop on. Chief punches it out of the ship, escaping the explosion on the ring just in time. And finally, we get to see the accumulation of all our efforts. The ship explodes, launching a huge chunk of the ring with it. The ring cracks apart as other chunks slam into each other. A stunning shot putting a close to this amazing story. We're the only survivors. No one else than UNSC got off the ring. There's a reason Halo has become such a huge brand name, and it's all thanks to the standout groundwork this game sets. The controls for the game, while very fluid, are pretty bog standard for what you would expect from a console FPS. The thing is, Halo essentially set that standard for how console FPS should control because it was so fluid. Compared to previously released console titles, like say GoldenEye, which don't get me wrong, is still a great game in its own right, Halo just beats it by miles. I feel like it'd be wrong of me to say that many games to come after this didn't take some inspiration from Halo, and rightfully so. Halo was a huge success for a multitude of well-deserved reasons. An interesting story, character designs of charming personalities, and an iconic aesthetic. And the story, while it has its pitfalls, is a sound enjoyable experience start to finish. If you've never played it before, I implore you to. It's pretty affordable with the Master Chief Collection, and holds up even by today's standards. Speaking of the Master Chief Collection, let's talk about the Anniversary Edition. The biggest draw of the Anniversary Edition is its updated graphics. Now, this was released in 2014, so it's not at the same level as modern day graphics or anything, but it is on a technical scale leagues above the original with updated textures, models, and sounds. My biggest issue with this, and it's an issue multiple people have, is it removes a large part of the atmosphere and subtlety the original graphics had. Sections that were almost dark and foreboding are overlit. Areas that were sparse in detail have been filled with unnecessary detail that take away from the original intent. It's not the worst, but if you ask me, you're giving yourself less of an experience by playing it this way. I'd recommend playing it with the original graphics 100% of the time. If you really can't get past how dated it is, then the Anniversary Edition is sufficient enough. With all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. I plan on covering all the Halo games as well as a plethora of other titles that interest me, so if that sounds like something you would be keen on, please consider subscribing. I hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll see you on the next video.